Okay, an issue people talk about during their Friday night meals, but no one knows what they're talking about. No, I'm not talking about a ceremony. I'm talking about what Gediyash calls shiddichim. Talking about relationship stuff. This is my take on relationships. Now, the first thing is when it comes to relationships, you are not allowed to talk about it. Well, you're not allowed to talk about it unless you have very deep empathy. All right? Because you're dealing with a very, very sensitive topic. And most actions and communications when it comes to relationships is not really related to relationships. They have more to do with your upbringing, childhood wounds, stuff like that. Why is that? So why can't you say that when people are looking for jobs, that's really a childhood wound that they're trying to fulfill, when we know that's generally not the case? That's because most of the things in life have become automated, and even like jobs and everything else like that, there's more of an automation feeling to everything, so it lacks this sort of, unless you're in sales, but it lacks this like Darwinistic, Wild West, very high stakes situations. So in life, you generally don't have those. The last place that you have socially and in life right now, the last place you have the Wild West and this type of situation are in relationships. And that's why people play all kinds of games in relationships that not necessarily have to do connected to relationships, has to do with their inner child and childhood wounds, and they're spelling that out and to see if other people accept them, etc., to fulfill that sort of again, basically the way he's saying it is childhood wounds. Now, that being said, let's see what my next point is. When you talk about relationships with people, it's not just if they're going to be accepted by other people. It's a matter of there's a lot more going on than the relationship itself. Therefore, if you want to talk about it, you have to have a lot of empathy, and most people don't. And most people don't talk about it with empathy, and they're not very effective in what they're doing. Now, the reality is right now that the way the world stands and the way things are statistically, you look around, you'll have, let's say, 100 people in your general social circle. You're like, obviously friends is very close, but then 15, 20 people you know, but then there's 100 people in your general social circle. Fast forward 10 years from now, but 60 to 80% of them are going to be single, still remain single. We always think that people want to get married and have kids, and that obviously is a normal human need and a human want, but the reality is it works in communities. So you'll have a community or in their group, everyone gets married and it goes in clusters. Your communities that are single remain single indefinitely. So if they're single now, still, let's say you hung out in a group in the Upper West Side in 2001, right now it's 2024, more than 20 years later, a good 50% of those people are still single, and they still go to those events or different events or whatever. So you need to prepare, in my opinion, the work now has to be to prepare to be single for the rest of your life, and how you're going to navigate that. It's a difficult thing to navigate. I think it's easier for women. I may be wrong, I don't know. It's definitely men, when they're single and they get older and they're single, they become, the word in Yiddish is verfoilt. They become that way. Now, I'm not laughing at them. It's a funny word. And I'm kind of laughing. Who am I laughing? I'm laughing at myself too. But the point is, you need to prepare for that for that scenario and figure out how to do it. Now, when you're single for the rest of your life, you're fighting a losing battle. You are fighting a losing battle because the reality is, if you are single, it's very difficult to be single long term. So when you're younger and you're sort of on the playground, let's say 20s or 30s, used to be 20s, used to be teenagers, and then people start getting married in their early 20s, and then later. So now it's the 20s and 30s that people are on this playground of being single, and sort of you're in that thing of getting invited to places, and you're always getting invited out, and you're always adhering to the group of people that you're part of. When you get older, yes, let's say half the people get married, but also people are just done with looking for approval from the group. And now they're all of a sudden on their own. Today's day with technology, you could totally be on your own for the most part. You can be very distracted with your phone, with your computer for hours on end, and people have disappeared into those places. A good percentage of people have disappeared into those places after work or instead of work, etc. So the reality is, of today, you need to figure out, okay, how am I going to buck this trend of becoming the way it is, that sometimes you see single people becoming like bitter and to exude the opposite type of energy. Now, a good example would be Ed Koch. He was single. He never got married. No one knew about it. I don't know if he was in a relationship or not, because when people asked him about his relationship, we say, like, we don't know. He said, I don't deny or discuss my relationships. And he is someone that saved New York City. He got into politics, and he's always an exciting, happy, outgoing person. He wasn't like, oh, you're single, Nebuch, maybe I'll find someone. He wasn't like that. He was like someone that exuded confidence. And he used to tell one time an old Jewish lady, maybe she was Italian, I don't know. She said, could you bring back the city to where it was? And he said, the city was never as great as you thought it, you said it, you think it was. No, your city was never as great as you say it was, and we'll bring it back to even better than it is now. So the situation with relationships right now, I would compare in history to World War One. During World War One, the Germans and the French, or something like, they got close to each other. They were shooting at each other, and then at some point they stopped. And for the next several years, they were barely shooting at each other. It was sort of a standstill. That's what's happening with relationships right now. No one's doing any moves. When's the last time you heard a friend say, I'm going on a date tonight? It's sort of, now there are people that are getting married, but we're talking about a big percentage. So if something is affecting 40, 50% of society, then it's a real issue. If even 10 or 20%, we're talking about a huge percentage. Then obviously the more ethnic communities people get married more, and then the more secular communities even less. In general, in America, we're talking about the West now, we're not talking about Israel, we're talking about the West. In America, under the age of 30, 50% of men under the age of 30 haven't been on a date in the last year. Now, why is this a disaster? This is a disaster because there's not going to be any future. If there's not going to be marriage, there's not going to be connection. There's not going to be marriage, there's not going to be relationships, there's not going to be marriage, there's not going to be marriage, there's not going to be a future generation. And that means that there's going to be an inverse into the society, to the numbers in society. Now, it could be the technology will figure out something, but generally when there's an inverse, there's an inevitable collapse to society. That means the collapse of the West, collapse of America, collapse of the West. You're talking about 30, 40 years ahead in the future, and that's a really bad scenario if America collapses. The world is in very big trouble. Already the world's getting into darkness. The world's going to be in really bad trouble if that happens. Now, the thing, though, is like this. During every disaster, you had in every disaster of society that the darkness New York City went through, and all that other stuff, during the terrible darkness, you had the beginning of the light of the future. Like October 7th was the worst of the worst of the worst, and every day you heard worse and worse news, and it's just hard. It's been horrible since then in terms of, well, I don't want to talk about it, but in terms of the hostages, it's just bad, and there's 2 wars going on, and even if you're in Israel and everything seems fine, which they are fine, but still you meet people that are going to be on the front lines tomorrow. It's a real day-to-day situation. What am I trying to say? The future leaders were born on October 7th. My point is, I guess, disasters that happen, there's light in the future. This gullus, this disaster in relationships, is the end of a lot of lines of people. You got married, your parents, great grandparents came from a long line of people, and they all survived. If they were Jewish, they paid extra for it generation after generation. And then there's you, and that's it. There's not going to be any kids that come after you. It's not to make you a sad person or to me a sad person, but that's just the inevitable fact that's going to happen. So it's a disaster that there is no future light that comes from it. The one thing I will say that I've witnessed myself is that people are getting married younger and younger. They looked at the other generation, they were like, these guys waited and waited and waited, and we see that was not good for us, so we are getting married much younger. That's what I see happening now. I've seen it in my family, and I'm actually very proud that people are doing that. They see other people were single for a really long time, and what did I get them? So maybe there is a light. Maybe there is a light after this. So, but the way it looks in the general trend is that it's a disaster in relationships, and there is no future light to it, because once it's over, it's over. Once a woman can't have kids anymore, she can't have kids anymore. Once a man decides not to get married, and it's just going to happen in a very big part of society. Now, the general society in America, and then there's the Jewish community, but it's hit everywhere, by the way. Even Hasidic communities, they mention that events, praying for people that should get married. It's just a situation that hit all communities all over the place. What's the cause, and what are some ways of looking at it in a bit of a different way? The cause in general is there's There's a disease there's disease of hatred in the West. This is in the West. In Israel, it's not like this a lot. You see the contrast of it. In other words, when you come to Israel, you see the disaster that there's in America. There's a disease in America. It's called feminism. Feminism, we know what officially it is, but in reality is hatred towards men. And feminism has messed up both men and women. It's trained women to look at men in a negative way and just spout out negativity towards them across the board all the time. And it took away the incentive of men to improve themselves, because when you're being shamed for existing and you're hated on for nothing. In other words, feminists, even more ardent radical feminists, will agree that that the hatred that goes is always on the wrong men. This is one of the reasons. There's also technology, and also dating used to be in little small ponds in different neighborhoods or towns or whatever. But now that with the online dating, you have the whole world that you're competing with. So inevitably, what they say is that women are all focusing on the top men, and the bottom men are not getting any attention. And the women are cheering the top men, and women are okay with being single, even if they don't find a man that they like. And therefore, the bottom 50% of men, it's like, they're just basically, they didn't explode, they imploded and withdrew and out of society. Now, you could say that they should step up, but if you're shaming them for existing and saying that men are bad and toxic masculinity and stuff like that, then what incentive do men have to? It's hard to live anyway. It's hard to wake up in the morning and live. Life is hard, but if you're a man, it's even harder, and you have to prove yourself and build yourself up. What's the incentive to build yourself up if you're being told to begin with that you don't deserve to exist, and all the problems of the world are on you? So that affected like half the men. And so my personal experience, I'm someone in general that gets good feet. When I walk into a room, people are happy to see me. If they know me, hey, Shmuley's here, how you doing? I'm very blessed to have that. The reason I'm sharing that is because when I meet people I don't know, so when you meet men, it's like whatever. But when I meet Western women, there's vicious hatred. And I don't get it usually. So it's not like I'm someone that gets shitty energy from people in general, rejecting energy. I'm not someone in general who gets rejecting energy from people, but from Western women specifically. And I see the contrast in Israel. Whenever I feel this vicious hatred, this disdain, this attitude, always it ends up being a woman from America, from England, from France. Western women were brainwashed to hate men. It's a disaster. Now, when a guy goes over to a woman 50% of the time, she's nasty to him, what about before he even went over to her? So she's nasty to him then already, inevitably. Not inevitably, for sure. So it's just Western women were brainwashed to hate men. It's one day, when they look back in history, they'll look back at the disaster that this feminist thing has brought, unless they own all the history stuff in the future. So it's going to be like the Renaissance, when they made up a story. In the 1870s, they wrote about the Renaissance in the 1500s. The world Renaissance didn't even come around. So what Renaissance was there? The only idea of Renaissance was in the 1870s, because the historians wanted to elevate themselves. So it could be that the feminists will be in charge in the future and no one will know the story. There is a way of looking at it a little bit different, which is a step one. The answer to look at things a little bit differently is number one. The first attitude change you have to have towards relationships, you realize you have no control. You have no control because you're so trying to control things with your mind. It's like when you're doing moving. Why is moving so tiring? Besides the fact it's physically tiring. But even if you hire workers, they're moving for you. Why is it so tiring? Because you want the move to happen quicker. But how? Not by the physical movement. You're taking your mind and you think that your mind is going to make the boxes go into the truck quicker. That's one of the many reasons that moving is very hard. Same thing as relationships. You're trying to control the situation with your mind, not with your mouth and not with your words and not with your actions. You have to realize you have no control. And just realize that's the first number one thing. Number two is, if you're in America, don't deal with Western women. Let's just say it's not their fault. They were brainwashed to hate men. It's unfortunate, but you shouldn't have to deal with that. See if you can deal with if you're Jewish, you can go to Israel, you can go to other countries. If you're not Jewish, there's a million countries you can go to and meet women that are just not full of hatred towards you. It's just very unfortunate. That's what happened. And I would say that's number one little bit. I'm coming up with 10 things you can do to new attitude towards relationships. And number one is you have no control. And that's it. Let me see if there's any other points I want to make. Oh, a separate story about Bokism and blah, blah, blah. But okay, we'll get to that another time.